You get to the book of Acts, chapter 15, and the church is already having some major problems getting along. You have the Jewish sect of the church, and they think it would be appropriate to keep following the law of Moses from the Old Testament, even though we are now officially in the New Testament era by this point. Then you've got the Gentile portion of the church. They think that the Mosaic Law was obsolete by that point, that new believers, especially those from outside the Jewish traditions, were under no obligation to follow it. And that leads to the Council of Jerusalem, where the bigwigs put their heads together and they came up with this pronouncement. Acts 15:19 through 20. Therefore, my judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God, but should write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols, and from sexual immorality, and from what has been strangled, and from blood. So, these are 4 things that, regardless of who you are, where you are, what culture you grew up in, all believers should follow. 4 things that are the starting point for sanctification. Number 1 is not committing idolatry, which makes perfect sense. You're a Christian now. You shouldn't be worshiping any false gods, obviously. Number 2 is about sexual immorality. Again, makes sense. If you don't follow the Bible's design for sexuality, you get yourself into all kinds of trouble. This is a major emphasis of the Bible. It makes sense why this would be one of the 4 cardinal rules that the Council of Jerusalem laid down. But then it says that new believers should abstain from things strangled and from blood, which basically means not to consume blood. Now, what was that all about? Like, why not ban lying or stealing or cheating at your Wordle? Well, as we investigate this, we'll find that the prohibition on consuming blood goes beyond the law of Moses. It's actually one of the first rules that God placed on mankind right after Noah got off the ark. And why is that? To figure out the answer to that question, we'll be learning about what was going on in the pre-flood world according to the book of Enoch. Yes, consuming blood is gross, but that sounds more like a sanitation or a dietary issue, not a moral issue, right? Yet it seems to be one of the top 4 most important things that believers should avoid in the book of Acts. And I find this to be weird, and I'd like to explore why it's in the Bible. Turn to Acts 15, and let's get weird. Welcome to Weird Stuff in the Bible, where we explore scripture passages that are bizarre, perplexing, or just plain weird. This is Luke Taylor, and if you tuned in today excited to learn about Mount Hermon, I have to delay that episode 1 more week. I just didn't quite have all my ducks in a row on that one. I wanted to do some more research first, so I'm delaying that one for right now, and therefore I just decided to go ahead and jump into what I had planned next, which is today's topic: why does the Bible prohibit the eating of blood? And by the way, I mentioned the book of Enoch in the intro. That's because we're in a series right now on the book of Enoch and the places where it intersects with Scripture. And so we're going to start with that context of Acts 15. And this is one of those chapters that shows the beginnings of a debate about the relevance of the Old Testament law, a debate that continues in New Testament times and rages today within the church. And honestly, I think there can often be good arguments on both sides of this issue. I tend to come down on what is probably the most traditional view, that there are civic and ceremonial rules in the law of Moses, and those are things that are no longer binding on us today. Things regarding sacrifices and the tabernacle/temple, things regarding civil penalties for breaking the law. Those don't necessarily apply to us in the church. The church is more of what I call a specialized task force that Jesus left here to fulfill the Great Commission. We're not a sovereign nation like ancient Israel was, and so we can recognize the context as we read those passages and think about ways that those apply today. But there's a number of moral laws that we definitely should still directly follow. Not the ceremonial or civil laws, but moral laws. Things like, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, or thy neighbor's donkey, or thy neighbor's John Deere Z500 series gas-powered zero-turn lawnmower. If Moses was writing the 10 Commandments today, that's probably what it would have said. And it's usually pretty clear what's civil and what's ceremonial and what's moral when it comes to the Mosaic Law. However, there was this one thing that this group called the Judaizers, who kept trying to drag us back into the Old Testament, found to be a particularly sticky issue. It says in Acts 15:1 and 2, but some men came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. And after Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and debate with them, Paul and Barnabas and some of the others were appointed to go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and the elders about this question. And it goes on for a whole long story, discussion. For the sake of time, I'll just summarize it. So they have their whole council about the matter. And there were some Pharisees, some good Pharisees, saved Pharisees, but wrong Pharisees. And they did not want to let circumcision go. Barnabas, Paul, and James, they all weighed in and they testified that God is working amongst the Gentiles, and he doesn't seem to be held back by what's going on in their underwear. So y'all just need to mind your business. And then it ends with these words, verses 19 and 20 that we read before. Therefore, my judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God, but should write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols, and from sexual immorality, and from what has been strangled, and from blood. Now, I don't know what your top 4 would have been, but that's what they came up with. And what do you know? Circumcision didn't make the cut. And you might wonder what things strangled means. Well, this is probably closely connected to the prohibition on blood right there, that when an animal has been strangled to death, then their blood pools in their body. And Leviticus 17 gives instruction that you should drain out an animal's blood after you slaughter it so that you don't consume the blood. So where does this focus on not eating, drinking, consuming blood, where does all that come from? Well, this was one of the first things that God told Noah back when Noah got off the ark. There's a moment, it's right there on Mount Ararat where the ark landed, and they make what is called the Noahic covenant. And this is where God promised that he would never send another flood on the earth and wipe out all life. And the chapter begins with these words, Genesis 9, 1 through 7. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Let me read that verse again. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Verse 5. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. And you be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth, and multiply in it. And the chapter goes on, and God promises he'll never send a worldwide flood again. But I want to focus really close there on what was said in verses 4 and 5. Blood. Okay, for one thing, humans are so precious that if you kill one, God says you should receive the death penalty for that bloodshed. So this is when consequences are put in place for murder. And it says even animal blood is to be respected. That there is something spiritually tainted about eating meat that has blood in it. And hang tight, we're going to talk later about what that is. Before we get into the spiritual side, just think about it scientifically, how significant that blood is. If I go to my doctor, if I give him a sample of my blood, it's going to give him a whole readout on how my body is doing. My cholesterol, my glucose, my enzymes and calcium levels, all that kinds of stuff. The life is in the blood scientifically. And medically speaking, I mean, if I lose too much blood, I will die. The human body, it holds about 5 to 6 liters of blood. For those of us who don't like to do the metric system, 1.3 to 1.6 gallons, okay? Blood actually accounts for about 7 to 10% of your entire body weight. And if you lose too much of it, you will die. If you lose 40% of your blood, so that's about 2 liters, you can die. So truly, your life is in the blood. So that's the significance of blood in the natural realm. But let's talk about the supernatural realm. So we read about what God said right after Noah got off the ark. God said, you can eat meat, but don't eat meat with the blood in it. And don't shed any human's blood, aka murder them. And those are the very first rules that God wanted mankind to follow in this new post-flood world. So if that's what he said at the outset, does that have some relevance to what was going on in the pre-flood world? I would say there seems to be. We've been studying in our Book of Enoch series this year about what the pre-flood world was like. The Watchers descended to the earth in the days of Jared. They did a few things. 1, they created the giants or the Nephilim with the human women. 2, they taught forbidden knowledge. things like sorceries, potions, witchcraft, as well as astrology and illicit drugs, and even cosmetics. And they introduced new weaponry to the antediluvian people. Now, I know the book of Enoch is not scripture, okay? I can't prove from the Bible that the Watchers were literally teaching all these things. The book of Enoch has some errors. It was not perfectly preserved as the Bible was, so I don't take everything in it as gospel truth. But as I said at the beginning, we're trying to read it this year and observe where it has intersections with the actual Bible. So let's revisit Enoch's 7th chapter, and I want to look at what it was like to live alongside these giants. All right, and so it said, and all the others together with them, talking about the Watchers, they took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go in unto them and to defile themselves with them. And they became, I'm going to condense it a little bit. They became pregnant. They bare the great giants. Let me skip down to verse 3 of that chapter. Giants, okay? Giants who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. All right, so it said that at first the giants, they were fine with eating the acquisitions of men. Okay, the food that the men labored in the fields to bring in, it said they were fine with that at first, but as the time went on, the giants became more numerous and they became more insatiable in their appetites. I kind of think of the grasshoppers and how they treated the ants in A Bug's Life. Okay, they just started taking everything that man brought in till there was no food left. And then this is when the horror movie starts, okay? When they ate all that, then the giants started eating human beings themselves. George Nicholsburg, he's a scholar on religion. He taught at the University of Iowa for decades, and he wrote a volume on 1st Enoch. He said, "They are no mere warriors plundering crops and slaughtering as armies are wont to do. They slaughter human beings in order to devour them in the place of the food they do not supply." And then to finish up Enoch chapter 7, it said, and they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish. And we read about that a few weeks ago. But then it says this, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. So note again this phrase, and drink the blood. It wasn't merely about the killing and about the eating, but it was about consuming the blood itself. There was something wrong with that. And I can tell you, I mean, from reading a lot of books or reading some books, hearing a lot of stories, I'd say people who came out of the occult and witchcraft and all that, it is really common to read in their stories of people who would consume blood as part of their satanic and their pagan rituals. And, you know, it's gross, it's evil, and it actually is a moral issue. It's not just a sanitary issue. This isn't just a dietary restriction. Like this is something really disturbing that they do. And now let's compare Enoch 7 with Genesis 6, and let's look at what the Bible told us about the pre-flood world and see how this lines up. I'm going to switch to New King James Version here. Genesis 6, 4 through 7. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God, aka the Watchers, when they came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. And then verse 11, the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So we see that Genesis 6, it really correlates perfectly with Enoch 7. I mean, Enoch, of course, gives more details, but in Genesis 6, it refers to the giants as men. That's a little strange. It said in verse 4, these were the mighty men who were of old. And then the next verse, it says, the wickedness of man was great in the earth. And verse 11 said, and the earth was filled with violence. And so we can understand whenever we pair that with Enoch 7, we understand what kind of violence was really going on here, and also kind of what sins were being committed against the animals. And unlike A Bug's Life, these ants were not able to stand up to those grasshoppers. What it took was a dramatic cleansing of the earth through the flood to wash away all that corruption. In Rick Renner's book, Fallen Angels, Giants, Monsters, and the World Before the Flood, he says this, Although the Book of the Watchers, the Book of Jubilees, and the Book of Giants are not canonized books of the Bible, they offer valuable commentary regarding the things related to Scripture. Regarding the giants, these 3 books contained a unified record of their violent crimes, which included murder, cannibalism, and the consumption of blood. It seems that while the fallen angels couldn't restrain their sexual desire for women, their offspring, the Nephilim or giants, couldn't restrain their physical appetite for blood. God's command not to eat flesh with blood in it was the equivalent of him saying, rule number 1 is that you're not to drink blood. We will not return to the carnage and chaos that has just been destroyed. So again, that was page 164 of Rick Renner's book. And however, as we talked about, the Nephilim did in fact come back after the flood. How did they do it? I don't know exactly how. I mean, I have some theories. I've written about it on my website, weirdstuffinthebible.com, and I think I'll put that back up as a front page article for this week if you want to go read that again. But, just kind of like in The Rise of Skywalker where they're like, somehow Palpatine returned. Well, we just have to do the same thing with the giants, okay? Somehow the Nephilim returned. I mean, Genesis 6 basically already told us that. It said there were giants on the earth in those days and also afterward. So Genesis 6 already told us that they came back, but it didn't say how. And the next time we see the Hebrew word Nephilim mentioned, translated there as giants, the next time we see it is Numbers 13. That's when the 12 spies were spying out the land of Canaan. So this is hundreds of years later. This is the time of Moses. And here's what they came back and told Moses. It's Numbers 13, 31 through 33, back to the ESV version now. It said, then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. So they said, this land devours its inhabitants. Now, was that an exaggeration? Maybe it was. I mean, they were certainly exaggerating the danger here in general, because God had told them that they should go in and take this, that they could take the land. They're chickening out. But another idea of like this land devouring its inhabitants, that could be quite literal. It might have had cannibalistic giants scattered all around. And they said they seemed like grasshoppers in their sight. That's kind of messing with my Bug's Life metaphor from earlier, but these were giants who were here in the land of Canaan. Did Numbers 13 really imply that the Israelites were afraid that they would literally be eaten by the Nephilim? That's a debatable point, but I think whenever you bring in a Book of Enoch understanding, that definitely could have been on their minds. And there's lots of stories in antiquity, not just in the Bible, but in antiquity, of the ancient giants who wanted to eat people. You have the Cyclopes in Homer's Odyssey and in Greek mythology. You have the Grendel of Beowulf in Norse mythology. And then we even have it in one of our own popular Western myths, Jack and the Beanstalk. Okay, there's this big old giant walking around, and what is he saying? Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman, because life is in the blood. And now I'm going to have to do something, and this is a painful decision, guys, but I am going to have to cut off today's episode pretty hard right here, okay? The reason is that I'm not done with everything I wanted to talk about today. Like, I have a lot of things that I learned this week about blood and atonement and Jesus and the cross, and I want to share all those things with you, but like if I keep going into it, this is going to be like a 45-minute episode. So therefore, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a follow-up episode. I'm going to release it this Friday here on the feed. It's going to be a direct follow-up to what I've been talking about today. It's not so much about the book of Enoch, but it's going to expand on this subject of life in the blood. You see, Genesis 9:4 said this to us, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And that Hebrew word for life right there is nephesh. So this word, it means life or soul. Life or soul. And most of the time, it means soul. But like, what in the world does that even mean? So when I started peeling back that layer of the onion, this opened up so much of my understanding of the rest of the Bible. I can't wait to share all those things with you. And so, like I said, this was a painful decision. I don't want to make you wait a whole week for it. I want to go ahead. I want to get back into the book of Enoch and start climbing Mount Hermon. So we're still going to do that next week. This week is just going to be Blood Week. And so if you want to learn more about the reasons behind this prohibition on the eating of blood, then stay tuned for this Friday's bonus episode. If you don't want to hear any more about it, if you're just here for the Enoch stuff, we'll see you next week. But until then, this has been Luke Taylor, and we'll see you soon for more weird stuff in the Bible.